The crowd went silent the moment it happened. A man stepped forward, confident, fearless, and desperate to prove himself. In front of everyone, he smashed 3 solid bricks on Bruce Lee's chest like it was nothing. People gasped. Some cheered, and for a split second, it looked like he had just humiliated a legend. But then, Bruce Lee slowly stood up. No anger, no warning, just a calm, terrifying presence. 4 seconds later, everything changed. He walked into the scene with a kind of confidence that demanded attention. You could see it in his posture, the way his shoulders stayed high, the way his eyes scanned the crowd like he had already won. To him, this wasn't just a demonstration. It was a chance to prove something bigger. Standing in front of Bruce Lee, he believed he had found the perfect moment to challenge a legend without even throwing a punch. The bricks were placed carefully, one on top of the other, solid and unforgiving. The air grew heavy as people leaned in, curious about what would happen next. He didn't hesitate. With a deep breath and a sudden burst of force, his hand came crashing down. The sharp crack echoed through the space as all 3 bricks shattered instantly. It was loud, dramatic, and impossible to ignore. For a moment it looked like a victory. The crowd reacted exactly how he wanted, surprised, impressed, and completely focused on him. Inside his mind, that single action confirmed everything he believed. Strength, dominance, control. He thought he had just displayed it all. Breaking those bricks on Bruce Lee's chest wasn't just a stunt in his eyes. It was a statement. A silent message that he wasn't afraid, that he could stand at the same level as a man whose name carried global respect. The attention fueled him, feeding his ego with every second that passed. But confidence built on assumption can be dangerous. What he didn't understand was the difference between spectacle and mastery. Anyone could create a moment that looked powerful, but true. Power didn't need to announce itself. And that was the gap he failed to see. There was a shift in the atmosphere almost immediately after the noise faded. Something subtle, something that only a few people noticed at first. Bruce Lee didn't react the way most would. There was no visible frustration, no attempt to reclaim attention, no rush to respond. Instead, there was stillness. A kind of stillness that didn't feel weak. It felt controlled, measured, and deeply intentional. That silence started to change the meaning of what had just happened. The man who broke the bricks was still standing there, expecting admiration, expecting acknowledgement, but instead of growing, his moment began to shrink. The louder his action had been, the more noticeable the quiet became. And in that quiet, doubt began to creep in. For the first time, his confidence wasn't as solid as those bricks had been. He started to sense that maybe he had misread the situation, that maybe what he thought was dominance was actually just noise. The realization didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, almost uncomfortably, as the weight of Bruce Lee's calm presence began to press against his earlier certainty. What made the moment unsettling wasn't the broken bricks. It was what came after. Bruce Lee didn't react the way anyone expected. There was no anger flashing across his face, no immediate retaliation, no attempt to match force with force. Instead, he remained completely still, as if nothing significant had just happened. That stillness wasn't passive. It carried a quiet intensity that began to shift the energy in the room. The man who had just shattered the bricks stood there, waiting for a response, but the absence of one started to feel heavier than any reaction could have been. Bruce Lee's eyes didn't show frustration. They showed focus. His breathing stayed steady, controlled, almost deliberate. It was as if he had already processed the situation in a way no one else could understand. People in the crowd began to sense it too. The excitement from the brick-breaking moment started to fade, replaced by a growing tension that was harder to explain. There was something about Bruce Lee's calm presence that didn't just fill the silence. It dominated. Without moving, without speaking, he had taken control of the moment back. This was the kind of power most people overlook. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't need applause. It came from discipline, from years of mastering not just physical ability but emotional control. Anyone could react instantly, driven by ego or impulse, but holding back required something deeper. It required awareness, patience, and absolute confidence in one's own capability. The man who had been so sure of himself moments ago started to feel the difference. His earlier action now seemed almost reckless in comparison. He had acted to be seen, to be recognized, but Bruce Lee didn't need any of that. His silence was enough to command attention. His stillness spoke louder than any display of strength. There was also something intimidating about unpredictability. If Bruce Lee had reacted immediately, it would have followed a pattern people understood, action followed by reaction. But by choosing not to respond right away, he broke that expectation. It created uncertainty, and in that uncertainty, tension grew stronger. The man couldn't read what was coming next, and that made the situation far more unsettling than any quick response could have been. Bruce Lee's approach wasn't about proving anything to the crowd. It was about control. Complete control over himself and the moment. He didn't rush, didn't allow emotion to dictate his actions, didn't give away his intentions. Every second of silence felt deliberate, as if he was allowing the weight of the situation to settle exactly where it needed to be. The contrast between the two men became impossible to ignore. One had relied on a loud, visible act to create impact, while the other used nothing but presence and composure to shift the entire atmosphere. And as the silence stretched just a little longer, it became clear that this wasn't hesitation. It was something far more calculated, something far more powerful. The shift happened so fast that most people didn't even realize what they were witnessing until it was already over. Bruce Lee finally moved, but there was no dramatic wind-up, no warning, no visible build-up. One moment he was standing still, completely composed, and the next, everything changed in a blur of motion that felt almost unreal. It wasn't loud, like the bricks breaking. There was no echo, no spectacle designed to impress. Just a precise, controlled action delivered with speed that the eyes struggled to follow. The man who had stood there moments ago, full of confidence, suddenly found himself unable to react. His body didn't have time to process what had happened. By the time his mind caught up, the moment was already gone. The impact wasn't just physical, it was psychological. His earlier confidence collapsed instantly, replaced by a sharp realization that he had underestimated something far beyond his understanding. What he thought was strength had been completely outmatched by something more refined, more efficient, and infinitely more controlled. The crowd felt it too. The energy snapped from tension into shock in a fraction of a second. There were no cheers this time, no immediate reaction, just a stunned silence that spread across the room. People looked at each other, trying to make sense of what they had just seen, replaying it in their minds because it had happened too quickly to fully grasp in real time. Bruce Lee didn't chase the moment after that. He didn't step forward to dominate further or extend the display. As quickly as he had moved, he returned to stillness. That was what made it even more powerful. The control didn't stop at the action. It continued afterward. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary aggression, just a clean, decisive response that ended everything in seconds. For the man who had broken the bricks, those 4 seconds stretched far longer in his mind. What felt like a bold statement just moments ago now seemed like a mistake he couldn't take back. The contrast between what he expected and what actually happened hit him all at once. He had come looking for recognition, maybe even validation, but instead he was left facing the reality of his miscalculation. The precision of Bruce Lee's movement revealed something deeper than raw strength. It showed timing, awareness, and an understanding of exactly when and how to act. There was no rush, no hesitation, only the perfect moment chosen with complete certainty, and that was the difference. Anyone could act quickly, but very few could act exactly when it mattered. Most with that level of accuracy and control. What lingered wasn't just the speed or the outcome. It was the realization that true power doesn't need repetition. It doesn't need to prove itself again and again. One moment, one action, perfectly executed, was enough to redefine everything the crowd thought they understood about strength.